Nigel Farage has announced that he's standing down as an MP. Yes, you heard it right. The leader of the party that is well ahead in the opinion polls is standing down to run in a by-election in his seat of Clacton because he thinks there's an attempt by the establishment to stitch him up, to stitch up reform, and he wants to take his case, as it were, to the people of Clacton.
This will be a people versus the establishment by-election. It's a chance to stick two fingers up to the entire establishment, to frankly tell them where to go.
So I'm delighted to be joined by Harry Horton. He is the man that has done his wonderful duty for ITV News by immersing himself in everything Farage and reform for the past 2 or 3 years. I suppose, Harry, a couple of questions. One is, were you surprised by the announcement today? Some are describing it as one of the riskiest stunts ever actually undertaken by a British politician. Do you think Farage will pull it off?
I was surprised, although I've learned over the years to never be too surprised by things that Nigel Farage does. Will he pull it off? I think I would probably, if I were a betting man, bet a fair amount of money on Nigel Farage winning this by-election. I spent a lot of time in Clacton during the general election 2 years ago, and Nigel Farage was almost universally popular with the constituents we met there. And in that part of Essex, he's over many, many years had a huge degree of popularity. So look, I think, he clearly feels very confident he'll win this by-election. I would feel pretty confident if I were him too. In terms of will this work for him in calling the by-election? Look, there have been over the past few weeks and months, maybe not questions within the party, but some people, there's been murmurings among some about whether Nigel Farage was leading the party in the right direction still, whether there needed to be a change of strategy. I mean, certainly some people have said publicly, the former Reform UK chair, David Bull, who was ousted from his role, he said publicly that Nigel Farage should perhaps take a bit of time off so he could rethink things. So in calling this by-election and framing it, as Nigel Farage did today, as a fight of the people versus the establishment, it regains the narrative for Nigel Farage. He regains control of where his party's going and the plan for at least the next few weeks. So in that sense, it works for him. But look, there's still these huge questions over Nigel Farage's gifts that he's received, this £5 million gift that he received from the crypto billionaire Christopher Harborne, and the donations and gifts we've learnt that he's received from this character, Posh George Cottrell, one of his close aides, that have been under real scrutiny in recent weeks. Those questions won't go away because of this by-election, but him having some control over his party, I think this does put him in a stronger position.
Harry, one of the things I've been thinking about is, Farage is a great performer, but I've been unclear whether the anger we saw from him in his address today, but we've also been seeing in recent days, whether that is manufactured or whether it's real.
No, I think it's very real, and I've never seen him, certainly in the time I've been following, I've never seen him as angry as I've seen him in the past 48 hours or so. And I think that is genuine. And speaking to people around him today, they say it's genuine. And he really is furious at what he sees as unfair treatment from the media towards him, and what he feels is this sort of attack on him by the establishment. And certainly, look, he has not been subject to the kind of scrutiny that he's had over the past few months. Then he's never had that scrutiny in his political career before. And look, it's to be expected because he claims he is the favourite to be the next Prime Minister. His party's been leading the polls for the last 18 months or so. So, this sort of scrutiny, these sort of detailed questions into his background, sources of funding, are the sorts of things that most politicians would expect. And I should say, the sort of treatment he's had from the media and broadcasters adheres to all the sort of normal ethics that other politicians get from the media as well. Look, I think he's genuinely really furious. But the way he's responded to the allegations about this gift and about the people surrounding him over the past few weeks, his response to it has been very different to the sort of response I would have expected from him just a couple of years ago. And I don't know whether that's the pressure of the job, the fact that he's in a much more high-profile position, or it's just that, look, he's fed up of it, he thinks everyone's out to get him, and he doesn't want to deal with it anymore. But, he certainly is really, really angry. And again, this is partly why I think he's decided to call this by-election. It's to try and reclaim the narrative, to try and have this fight out in public and sort of let the people decide in a way that, he thinks is much more favourable to him.
Yeah, well, it may be very real. It's also very Trump. It's what Trump does all the time, to turn himself into the underdog and the victim, and as a way of trying to win back some support. As you say, he's been investigated by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner for not disclosing the $5 million gift from the crypto billionaire Christopher Harbaugh that he received in the year before he became an MP. Many parliamentary experts say that this was a clear breach of the rules. He denies that. But when you have been talking to senior people within Reform, how worried were they that the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner was going to find him guilty, and then that the Committee for Standards, because that's the body that decides punishments for MPs, that they were going to suspend him? Certainly my sources seem to indicate they were deeply anxious, including Farage himself thought he was going to be found guilty. But was that the sense that you got?
Yeah, I think they expected a by-election to happen at some point over the months ahead when this investigation finally concluded. And look, the way they see it, and they would say this, is they think it's another stitch-up by the establishment to try and get rid of Nigel Farage. So in their view, of course, that's what's going to happen, because they always think that the establishment, whether it be, as they see it, the media or, other MPs, are in it to try and stop Nigel Farage in his tracks by whatever means possible. So, arguably, they feel as though they brought this by-election forward. They're having it on their terms, but there are people, as I'm sure you've been hearing, Robert, that there are people who feel that we could be in this situation again in a few months' time. Even if Nigel Farage wins this by-election, we could have a second by-election in Clacton should that investigation eventually conclude at a later date.
So this is where we get into, nothing about this actually, frankly, is simple or straightforward, but this is particularly complicated territory. And because, I've been talking to, the former senior parliamentarian, Robert Buckland, who was very much steeped in these standards issues for years. He says that under the rules, if Nigel Farage is re-elected, then the Parliamentary Commission of Standards, so obviously that investigation stops once he resigns, but if he is re-elected, that investigation by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner starts again, and, in theory, if he's found guilty, and, we've just discussed he probably would be found guilty, he'll be suspended, and then under the rules, the people of Clacton have the right to petition for a by-election, and then then we'd be in a second by-election, as you say. I guess I have sort of two slightly conflicting views about all of this, right? On the one hand, Parliament's rules are Parliament's rules, and many people would say it's really important for the rules of any institution, whether it be the rules of the court of law or the rules of Parliament, to be respected by particularly expected by those who are members of that institution. In this case, the MPs, and therefore Nigel Farage ought to be prepared to be investigated either sort of now or in the future. He will argue, and I have actually some sympathy with this view, that if he wins the by-election, he will have been judged on this issue. Because make no mistake, if this by-election takes, as and when this by-election happens, this will be at the heart of the contest. And he will say, I have just been judged by the people of Clacton, voters in this great country, and I have been cleared, I have been found innocent. And he would argue in those circumstances that it would be absurd in those circumstances for MPs to take it upon themselves to, in a sense, try him a second time. And I do slightly fear, as somebody who believes that it's really important for our great institutions to have popular respect, that if Nigel Farage were to then campaign as a renewed MP, that somehow he was being stitched up by Parliament in a very unfair way. I think quite a large number of people would have sympathy with him on that point. And, we already have incredibly low respect for politicians in this country. And I fear that respect would drop further.
Interestingly, Restore Britain, the candidate, the party launched by Rupert Lowe, the former Reform MP, they've said they're not going to stand in this by-election. And in fact, whilst we've been recording this, we've just had news come through that Kemi Badenoch, the Conservative Party leader, says that they will not stand the candidate in this Clacton by-election. She says it's a fake by-election, it's a gimmick. She says Nigel Farage is having a hissy fit. Do you think that's the right move by the Conservatives?
Well, they have calculated that it is more sensible to undermine the credibility of this by-election in the hope that, when, and it now looks as though it's inevitable that Farage would be re-elected, because the only, frankly, candidate who could defeat, Farage in a Clacton by-election would have been the Tory candidate. He will now be re-elected, no question about it. He has obviously had this by-election because he thinks it reinforces his credibility, reinforces the view that effectively the prosecution of him in Parliament is just an establishment stitch-up. The Tories are saying, no, this is proper due process. The stunt, as it were, is Farage's. They don't want the voters of Clacton to be seen to be sanitising Farage. And like Rupert Lowe, who you've just been talking about, who leads Restore, their big hope is that Farage is found guilty when he returns as an MP, that at that point he is suspended for long enough such that there's an automatic request to the people of Clacton for, they get the right to petition for a by-election. Only 10%, I think, of voters in Clacton have to call for a by-election. So we could be into a world, Harry, God save us, of having 2 Farage by-elections within a matter of just months. This is all completely crazy.
There's a very real scenario. It looks as though now, actually, as though the Liberal Democrats won't stand in this by-election as well. The Green Party, although they've said they'll stand, they may well change their mind as well. We're still waiting to hear from Labour, but it wouldn't be entirely surprising if Labour also said they're going to skip this by-election. It could be Nigel Farage in the middle of August.
Although on that, I should just say here in Ankara, the Chancellor I'm at the NATO summit here in Ankara. The Chancellor did just tell us she thought Labour would stand, but she didn't say definitively they would. So, I mean, you're right, there is this very real prospect that there's going to be a by-election with one candidate. Now, at least Nigel Farage has said that reform will cover the costs of the by-election. They've obviously got more money than they know what to do with, because a by-election with essentially one candidate. Is Count Binface standing? Actually, I mean, maybe it'll be two candidates. Maybe it'll be Farage and the legendary Count Binface.
But there is a risk here that it makes a mockery of this. You know, the way Nigel Farage is trying to frame this is, it's the people versus the establishment. I mean, if it's only him standing in this by-election and everyone else has boycotted it, yes, he could say, of course, that's what the establishment are doing. You know, they're trying to take away the legitimacy of your vote. But to a lot of people in the rest of the country, I mean, you know, there's a risk he ends up looking a bit silly.
I think there's a very high risk he looks like a bit of a fool. So I had been wondering whether this was going to be a very historic by-election along the lines of Andy Burnham's incredibly historic by-election in Makerfield, where he effectively won the by-election and got rid of the Prime Minister. This could be a historic non-event of a by-election that ends up actually genuinely damaging the credibility of the leader of reform.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. It could be, it may well be the case that, having thought an hour or so ago that I was going to be spending a lot of my summer in Clacton, I might only be having one visit to Clacton on results day after all.
Well, I mean, come on, where else would you like to spend, your summer? Sitting on a beach, with an ice lolly, building a few sandcastles. I mean, you may not be covering a by-election, but let's make no mistake. Clacton-on-Sea, the pleasures of Clacton-on-Sea. I hope you're not denigrating them.
Absolutely not. Having spent much of my summer there 2 years ago, I am relishing the prospect of being back there. Not just this summer, but perhaps later in the year if we end up getting a second by-election in Clacton again. And maybe I'll look at buying a house there if there's any left.
Now, I'm afraid that is all we have time for on this edition of Talking Politics. We will be back again next week. I think even Tom Bradby may be back by next week. We'll be with we'll be with you to share the drama. And a bit like this week, maybe a bit of comedy as well. But that's it. See you soon. Bye-bye.